Well, that was an upset. Welcome back to Motorsport 101. Hi guys, welcome to episode 506 of Motorsport 101. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Dre Harrison, and for the first time in literally 6 months, I'm reporting to you, recording an F1 podcast after the fact Verstappen has not won a Grand Prix. It's literally been 6 months since the last time this happened.
I thought the shocking revelation was that you knew somebody that was going to give, like, sketchy, like, cut rate appendix surgery.
I have your people call my people, etc. But no, not on this occasion. But welcome back to M101, everybody, and we're going to be talking a little bit of F1 from the land down under this week as we get ready to talk about the Australian Grand Prix. Still weird of talking about Australia and it not being in the season opener slot. I can't get over this. Also, I know this is me being a filthy European and the only filthy European on this podcast, but please don't ever make this Grand Prix go at 4 a.m. again. Oh,
European? Didn't you have a whole thing as to not be a European?
I still proudly call myself a European citizen, even if my government disagrees. Okay, I voted to remain. I'll have you know.
You get to have it both ways, though, because now you get to crap yourself as a European citizen, and you get the crowns on the pint glasses.
You know, it's the best of both worlds, clearly. Well, what do I know? But joining me as ever is Mr. RJ O'Connell. Hello, sir.
I'd say you know more than everybody that's just losing their mind about the new England kits. This is the new dumb distraction to, like, take people's minds off of what's really, really going wrong in the world. It's so true, but it is so funny seeing everybody losing their mind about this.
Yeah, it's like I'm gonna be real with you on this one. I try not to acknowledge it because the violence is the point from people who are looking for bad faith arguments about this.
Hi, Joey Barton.
Hi, Joey Barton. I hear your podcast needs some plays. You racist cunt. Anyway, what I was going to say here is that, yeah, like, if you want my 2 cents on that real quick, I'll keep it up in the nutshell for you. England and Nike have regularly changed versions of the St. George's Cross on numerous football kits and promotional campaigns over the years. The people that are arguing in bad faith against this are either members of parliament knowing they're about to lose their jobs in 6 months' time, maybe quicker if Richie Sunak actually grows a set of balls, or people that are trying to audition for GB News. You're welcome. The arguing is the point. Also joining me is Cam Buckley. How's it going, big man?
You know, I've been looking at this B-Spec 9X8 for like 5 hours now.
Yeah.
It's great.
So you're telling me you're enjoying Wang over there, yes?
It is an actual rear wing.
We will always remember you in our hearts forever. I've still got to put this together.
Like he had, like, RJ, you can't see him. RJ just showed a literal unopened box of the old Peugeot 9X8, which is glorious. And yeah, I can't deny the new one looks great, and there's a very nice looking sports car.
I just want the Peugeot. I want the hoodie that they were also showing off along with the new car.
Yeah, that is definitely a cool hoodie. I'd be all for that if in a pinch, let me tell you. But yes, Cam, are you a fan of the new Peugeot then, I assume?
It looks very nice. It will look great blowing itself the fuck up 3 hours from the end of Le Mans.
Oh, you don't have to let him down like that. Maybe you do. Who knows?
Kind of do.
Like in the Cam Buckley's world, that's his idea of letting somebody down gently. I'll let that one sit for a little bit there.
Letting someone down gently is my thoughts on the thermal IndyCar special race, which cannot be published on the internet.
Dude, well, okay. Before we get in the F1 race review, I think we all were in agreement that this was not good, and that we all agree.
It was so bad that I didn't even bother with it. I saw what I needed to see after qualifying, and I decided, you know what? My Sunday is worth more than this.
You skipped out on NASCAR.
No, I kept an eye on NASCAR. You know, the double Hendrick bully.
No, one and two. No, I was going to say, look, I'll keep I'll be with it. We're not doing a podcast on the thermal challenge because we all watched it and we thought, you know what, this is too negative to fill out an entire pod on its own, even by our standards. If you want some good, coherent thoughts on the matter that isn't going to be a rambling mess, go read Elizabeth Blackstock's post on Jalopnik about it. It's very to the point, and she hit a lot of the right notes. And I'm all for promoting friends of the show when I feel like it's necessary, and I think that would be the perfect thing to do. I can only echo a lot of her sentiments. I said from the start, it felt like an all-star game. I was prepared to give it a chance because I'm glad the series tried to seize the initiative and try to do something to promote itself outside of its usual 500 remit. This was not good execution, in my opinion. I think it was not a great circuit for it. I think the way it was advertised as brand-to-brand marketing alongside the Thermal Club is everything against what IndyCar stands for from a fan perspective, in my opinion. Being accessible, being affordable, having that close interaction with the sport, the cars, the drivers, etc. That's what everything and that's what everybody has told me about being an IndyCar fan, and then the Thermal Club is the complete opposite to that.
Well, you're just not a race fan.
And, look, I have respect
Neither
for
am
Connor
I.
Daly and people like that who was being paid to influence and promote the event and do the marketing coverage for it. But if you're going out of your way to tell people they're not a real race fan for being critical of a product they enjoy and normally love, then I'm sorry, you're being ignorant to the issues the series has. You can do better than that.
I'll sum up the event shortly. Alex Palou did a professional job to win as much money as he possibly could. There was carnage at the start of race one. There wasn't really a whole lot of overtaking. Colton Herta and Rob Edwards tried a silly strategy that went nowhere. I like the idea of an IndyCar All-Star race. It's like a chocolate cupcake. I like the Thermal Club as a test track. It's like mustard on a hot dog. What you don't do is put the mustard onto the cupcake and eat it. That's what this felt like.
Yeah.
Now going to be violently ill in the corner.
Places you can find us.
We're on motorsport101.com if you want to check us out on our website. All of our podcasts are on there as ever, as well as written reviews. By the time this goes out, there'll be written reviews of Formula One in Australia and MotoGP at Portimao, which will be our next episode as well. We're on Elon Musk's failed business investment, Dre Harrison 101, at RJ O'Connell, and at C Buckley 917, Motorsport_101 for the pod itself, includes 100% more images of Joseph Newgarden receiving giant checks. You're welcome, King. Also,
they didn't even give us the giant check photo.
Exactly.
That's how I knew this was going to be a bust.
Exactly. Or on Instagram at Motorsport101pod for all the updates on our content over there. And if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon, patreon.com/Motorsport101. $5 gets you early access to all our episodes before they go live to the public. You can upgrade to the $10 tier to listen to these episodes live as they're being recorded. And thanks to our new backer as well, the Ghost Raptor, who's backed us at the bronze tier. Thank you very much, my friend. I hope you enjoy the extras. I do occasionally give out some early access episodes to those in the bronze tier as well as the silver tier, just because I feel generous every once in a while, and why not? By the way, if you back us at any level on Patreon, all those early access posts we put out, you get the first 5 minutes for free now on Patreon anyway. So, hey, these Keeping It 101 segments and intros, you get them all for free now, as long as you back us on Patreon early anyway. So what's not to like? Go over there, back us for $1. It's a good time. It's a good time. So, without further ado, let's get into our quite loaded, actually, review of the Australian Grand Prix. A lot to talk about here, considering the race itself was largely quite mid.
Yeah, it was. But I think for a lot of people, the high point was that for the first time in 44 Formula One Grands Prix, and with 1,055 points scored in that time, Max Verstappen's finishing streak is over, as a failed right rear brake caliper for the world champion led to an early retirement after winning the pole position, and it cleared the way for Carlos Sainz to take the lead early on from what we learned would be Verstappen's wounded car and lead from nearly start to finish in a comfortable win and a Ferrari 1-2 finish for the first time since the 2022 season opener in Bahrain. And of course, it's worth pointing out, Carlos Sainz is a free agent at the end of the year. So, Dre, what'd you make of this shocking outcome to Australia?
Well, even Red Bull can be fuming every once in a while, I suppose. It's been a long time since you've talked about a Red Bull mechanical failure, but here we are, and we got one. And yeah, what can you say? It's one of those things in racing, and you know, this is a team that executes on a very high level, and it just had a tough luck weekend. They did qualify on pole. Perez was sloppy in qualifying; he got a penalty, and then Max has his right rear brake fail right from the start, and then Perez
did it fail
spectacularly.
Yeah, running around the track for about 3 laps with a stuck right rear brake. Good.
Just gets hotter and hotter until he catches fire.
Yeah, on the way into the pit, that disc finally exploded in a big shower of dust, and that was it.
Yeah, it's like someone just put. Like, I saw people on Twitter putting fart whoopee cushion sounds over it, and that's kind of a good way for it to go out, quite frankly.
Dude, you know what's crazy is that as I was watching this real time, I was watching Rush with my partner, you know, the Lada Hunt film, for those of you who may not know, because my partner hadn't seen it before.
Oh, yeah.
And as it was wrapping up, I go upstairs because I know the race is on. And I look and I see Verstappen's name is not at the top of the pylon, and it's grayed out. He's retired. And my first words were, "What just happened?"
Yeah. I think you've got to go back, I want to say, to this very Grand Prix 2 years ago for the last time Max had a technical DNF. That was the hydraulics. Having a free sunbather.
That was the fuel system. That was the fuel system exploding at the top of the motor.
It was just having a sunbathe at Bondi Beach, as you do.
But I did like how Max summed it up after the race, starting off with, shit happens.
I like how he just went to go eat. I like how he just went to go eat pineapple slices afterwards in hospitality.
That is a man who knows that he has won so much and will probably continue to win for so much that, hey, he's allowed to have an off day. He gets to go home early.
But you know who wasn't allowed to have an off day is Carlos Sainz, considering he is a free agent at the end of this year, and everything you can do to raise your value helps. And he had a damn fine weekend, all things considered. But
probably the best all-round weekend he's had in red since joining Ferrari. That was
absolutely.
It's between this and his win in Singapore.
Yeah, just damn good work all around. Out-qualified Leclerc comfortably. Should have really had pole. He botched his final sector on his pole lap. He was neck and neck with Max through 2 splits. Botched the final sector, but still was good enough for the front row. So, and once Max was out of the way, no one could touch him. He was just gone, and it wasn't quite a Max level dominant win in terms of seconds launched, but he was under no threat for the win whatsoever.
He was in total control. It's the kind of drive that, like, you wonder, man, Carlos Sainz is easily capable of doing this every weekend, and the reason why he hasn't is probably the reason why he's not going to be driving for Ferrari next year. We're not saying that Carlos Sainz Jr. is incapable of these drives. We're just saying, like, maybe if he was capable of doing this every weekend instead of just, like, every other weekend or every third weekend, he'd probably still be here racing with Charles Leclerc. But, you know, when you can sign Lewis Hamilton, just go ahead and do it.
Well, should we talk about Mercedes and their terrible, no good, very bad weekend?
Oh, brother, I don't even... Lewis Hamilton's race ended early. George Russell's race ended late.
Lewis Hamilton's race ended before it even began because they were so desperate to get anything out of this. They put him on softs to start the race. And the softs wouldn't even last a full lap in qualifying.
Yeah, desperation heave that was really from Mercedes. And, like I love that Toto after the race said we haven't swallowed a dumb pill since 2021, and yet they're finding new and creative ways to be worse year on year right now, because that was the least competitive Mercedes I can remember since we've been to turbo hybrids. They're locked into row 4 right now.
It's the least competitive I think they've been since 2012.
Right,
Dude.
that's what I'm saying. Like George Russell drove his nuts off until the end of the race, which we'll get to later. And he was fighting for sixth at the end of the day. And Hamilton, I don't know if he's mentally checked out yet, but it certainly feels like he might have done by now. The fact I've got to even entertain this notion says to me just how much he and this car are disagreeing at the moment.
Yeah, and they were getting shot to pieces in Sector 2. They were losing 7/10 in a straight line in parts of the race.
Yeah,
that was tough.
I remember when Sergio Perez came out of the pits at the end of his first stint against Hamilton, and he pulls a very naughty chop block across Hamilton's car to stay in front. But they're going side by side out of the exit of turn 2, and Perez has pulled out 2 car lengths by the time they get to turn 3. It's startling. Hamilton gets on the radio and immediately goes, "That car is a rocket ship." I'm just like, what's happening here?
Yeah, it's enough to be like outdragged by Red Bull because like everybody seems to have that happen to them. You're now dragged by McLaren, which is at this stage in time a customer Mercedes team
who blew them into the weeds this weekend. This was the best McLaren's looked thus far this year, and at no stage did Mercedes look any better than the 4th best car, and for much of the race they were the 5th best car because they were probably behind the Astons.
The angriest anybody had to be at McLaren was when they swapped Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri around, when Lando Norris was at that time clearly quicker and had a better chance of catching the 2 Ferraris in front.
He had no chance of catching the Ferraris. I think he got within 2 seconds of Leclerc, and Leclerc punched that gap out another 7/10. They were kind of in no man's land, but a clear third.
It's a profitable no man's land.
A very profitable given the state of the constructors right now.
No one would have mentioned that swap at all if it wasn't for me putting it in Autosports F1 script, cha-ching, or the fact that it was in Australia in the first place.
And Oscar had like a better weekend than like Daniel Ricciardo and Mark Webber have had most of their Australian Grand Prix weekends.
Because we're now wondering if Daniel Ricciardo's going to get to the European leg of the season going this way.
Oh boy!
To be fair, that main story came out of New Zealand media. Oh, I wonder why.
Drumming up your own intrigue, Dre. I want to get back to a point you touched on when we were talking about Carlos Sainz, that he's a victim of the Hulkenberg paradox. We know Carlos Sainz is good, right? To the point that we now appreciate that Carlos Sainz is underrated. But if everybody says he's underrated, he's not underrated. That just means he's fairly rated.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up my old 2021 theory.
Well, somebody brought it up first, and then I wanted to bring it up on the podcast.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Tennis Red, for that on Twitter, and thank you for bringing that up. It made me smile a little bit inside that my work gets mentioned from 3 years ago now. But yes, I called it the Hulkenberg paradox because, like I said, when everybody calls you underrated, you're not actually underrated. And that was Hulkenberg's problem for so many years when he was a midfield driver in Formula One. He was so good as a midfielder at one point. Everybody said he was underrated, which just doesn't make sense. It's Schrodinger's cat, but for F1 drivers. And this is the problem with Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz is not as spectacular as Charles Leclerc is. And that's okay. He's a very different kind of driver, and he's maybe 2% worse than Charles Leclerc is. And like and you know what's funny? You mentioned this whole idea about being underrated. I was literally seeing clips on BBC's Checkered Flag podcast with Harry Benjamin on it, and he made this exact screaming into the woods take about Carlos Sainz being underrated. No, there is a lot of people that genuinely think Carlos Sainz is the man at Ferrari. I remember in my days of hosting Hot Takes Wednesday on WTF1, the number one most repeated take I always got in my inbox was, Carlos Sainz is the better Ferrari driver. I'd rather have Carlos Sainz than Charles Leclerc. He's not underrated. I argue he's understated rather than underrated. He doesn't do a lot of the sexy, spectacular stuff that Charles Leclerc does in a Ferrari. But he's an excellent floor guy, and that's not an insult to Carlos at all.
I'd argue that he's an excellent peaks guy who has higher peaks but lower valleys.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. And look, he is not Charles over a single lap. He's not Charles over a race trim over a full season. He's not quite on that level. And Like,
but the thing is, if every year he's coming within a race or so of Charles,
that's fine.
No, but that's the thing, is that Charles really isn't better than him over a season and over a race. Because we've now have a major sample size where he really doesn't outpoint Sainz by very much. If he does at all, because he didn't in 21.
21 was more a case, I think. I mean, look, I think Charles Leclerc has been one of the most perennially unlucky drivers of the last era, when it comes to either Ferrari putting him on Horlick strategies, mechanical retirements, or acts of God. I'm not sure what combination of the three I'd describe it, but it's somewhere in that mix. And I think that's unfortunately made Sainz look a little bit better than he deserves at times. And look, I feel bad for Carlos because that's not his fault. He can only deal with the hand he's been given at the end of the day.
But if that's the sample size for 3 years, then is it really? Then it's not coincidence.
Answer me this then, Cam.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't half this paddock making a beeline for him then?
Because we're in a very conservative era for F1. But then I'd also say if he's got no ride for next year, but the guy replacing him is currently getting curb stomped by George Russell every weekend in qualifying, even if he is Lewis Hamilton. Maybe everyone's wrong.
Maybe. But what I would say is that Lewis Hamilton's had enough of a resume to build up a much larger benefit of the doubt than Carlos Sainz ever has.
Yeah, that's 7 championships. He is the greatest on-paper resume in F1 history.
Yeah, like I could say, like if Verstappen and Sainz had gotten along better, there's no doubt who I'd want in the second seat when it comes time to moving on for Sergio Perez. That this has been the best option ever since Daniel Ricciardo left Red Bull the first time. The problem is that we don't know if that's ever going to happen, if those fences can ever be mended. Then again, it's Formula One, and Lewis Hamilton signing with Ferrari is proof enough that the wildest shit can happen, so who knows?
I joke about this many a time. Jeff Jarrett got a WWE Hall of Fame induction. Anything's possible.
Damn.
If you know, you know. But what I would say is that, yeah, I agree that, you know, the sport should be making a beeline for a driver of Carlos Sainz's quality. He is a bona fide top 6 driver in F1, but unfortunately, the way the sport is calibrated right now, he's kind of in a bit of a problem. I mean, let's break this down. Red Bull, he'd absolutely be a great fit over there on raw ability alone, but we all know there's politics involved with the Verstappen camp trying to run that team. McLaren's drivers are locked in until 2026. Ferrari's bringing in Lewis Hamilton, which is understandable. If you can get Lewis Hamilton, you sign Lewis Hamilton. End of discussion. You know, you look at Mercedes, they're all in on Andrea Kimi Antonelli to the point where they were prepared to give up Lewis Hamilton to bring him in the first place. Aston Martin, unless Fernando Alonso wants to cause another high-profile breakup, who knows at this point with him? That's the only way he's ending up there because we all know they're not getting rid of Lance Stroll. Alpine are cheats. The only other viable option to me is Audi. And Audi,
I think that is a perfectly viable option. If you're Audi, you should be kicking down every bank vault door.
Why not?
This man.
I was gonna say, why not bring back the 2018 Renault lineup of him and Nico Hülkenberg?
Yes, absolutely.
It would be a statement of intent from Audi. And a program that up until recently we thought was just like going to leave at the 59th minute of the 11th hour, leave Sauber holding the back.
Yeah, and it turns out they bought the whole team.
The bag of what? Stripped wheel nuts.
Exactly.
Ultra light wheel nuts.
Ultra light cheeks. That team, purely off of 3 for 3 for awful pit stops on the year across the 3 weekends. I'm rating them below Alpine.
Dude,
just this once.
And that's bad, because, like, I jokingly suggested that, like, you know, maybe Fernando Alonso has one more Enstone reunion in him, and everybody was just like, you're not serious, man. Go sleep. Go outside.
Thank you for the immortalization there. Yeah, you know how bad Alpine is when one of their drivers is laughing, screaming, crying, throwing up on the radio over making Q2.
Dude.
Yeah, I hope Carlos is. I made this point when I wrote my race review on the website this morning, just to move on before we move on to the next point, is that Carlos reminds me, in a sense, of Nico Rosberg. And I wrote about Nico Rosberg in a similar way, God, 8 years ago now, nearly. That when Nico Rosberg got to F1, he was always in the shadow of somebody else. He was in the shadow of his dad, who'd won a world title before him. He got a good seat at Williams, just as his best friend and rival, Lewis Hamilton, got an even better one at McLaren and ended up arguably should have won a world title as a rookie, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And then year 2 became a world champion. Rosberg got a top-end seat by going to Mercedes, right as Michael Schumacher got there and took all the headlines, even though Rosberg went 3-0 against him, against a still pretty solid Michael. Maybe not the Michael we know, but still a pretty good Michael Schumacher. And just when he was making that elite team his own, his arch nemesis comes back over Lewis Hamilton again. Rosberg dedicates 4 years of his life to the point of mental and physical exhaustion to beat him. He finally got there in the end, and he gave the middle finger to the sport on the way out because that was all he had left to give. He finally broke out of that shadow. I'm not sure Carlos Sainz gets the same ending because that's if you think about it, Carlos Sainz's career is very much played in a similar way, in that his dad was a very prolific world champion of his own in rallying. Mm-hmm. He got to F1. He was a very highly rated prospect that was outclassed by a generational prospect in Max Verstappen when they came in together. He broke up with the Red Bull umbrella in unceremonious circumstances, had to rebuild his career after he looked second-rate against Hülkenberg at Renault. He had to rebuild himself at McLaren in terms of a personality, a character, as the team itself was going for a rebrand. And he got to Ferrari, and depending on who you ask, hasn't been exceptional there against Charles, but has been solid. I hope, given that the man turns 30 in September, and that's a significant age milestone for a lot of people in life, I hope he can forge a path and land on his feet somewhere where he can be the guy, because he has never been the guy in his F1 career. Yeah. Not really. Even if he was at McLaren, there was still Lando Norris, and everybody was great in Lando as the next big thing.
I would say that, think about what happened with Sergio Perez in 2020, right? We get to about the end of the year, and it looks like, when he gets ousted from Racing Point, this is going to be it for him. 10 years, you've had a good run, but it's time for you to move on, even when you still have value in the sport. And then he goes out and wins the Sakir Grand Prix, going last to first, and somebody made room for him, even if it was not a conventional choice. That team was Red Bull. I'd like to think a team will make room for Carlos Sainz. I don't know who it's going to be.
Well, and if you're going to put yourself in the shop window, you have your task. Keep blowing Leclerc out.
Yeah, because so far, this is the best he's looked in a Ferrari since he got there. He's been excellent all season long so far. If he racks this up, be so good they can't ignore you. That's what I was told many a year ago by my dad, and I hope Carlos keeps trucking, because the way he's driving right now, he's going to be impossible not for someone to hire, because he's been excellent so far this season. Long may it continue. Now, there was one incident that was not, shall we say, a happy ending to the Grand Prix. On the final lap of the race, we had an incident between Fernando Alonso and George Russell. Kind of. You'll see what I mean. I mean, kind of in a minute. Shall we say Alonso was, quote, drove erratically on the final lap on the run towards turn 6. George Russell, who was half a second behind Alonso going into that final lap, tries to follow along, gets caught out, hits the inside wall at turn 6, goes off and wrecks his car. He's almost upside down on his side as the race comes to an end. A VSC was immediately deployed on the final lap of the race to neutralize it as it happened. And to our surprise, Fernando Alonso was called to the stewards after the race, and as a result of that stewards meeting, he was given a drive-through penalty. Now, because obviously it was the final lap of the race and he couldn't serve it, it was converted to a 20-second time penalty for, quote, aggravating circumstances in regards to George Russell's incident. It dropped him from 6th to 8th on the road. was this a deserved penalty? Because this has been a big room splitter on social media on this one, and I have thoughts on this. I know you do too, RJ.
I'm going to look over how this happened. On lap 36, passing under the bridge before turn sets, Russell can see Alonso ahead. It's about, I'd say from this angle, about 10 car lengths or so. Russell closes in as they reach the corner. It's kind of a medium speed corner. That typically tends to happen. But by this time, the next lap, they're slightly closer as they pass the bridge. And then in real time, it's hard to pick up. Does that influence a lot of my early thoughts on this? That Russell closes very suddenly as Alonso as they approach the corner, and then Russell loses control. I think all of us real time were thinking just like, well, Russell just blew the corner in a haste trying to catch Alonso and crashed.
And that wasn't even where my mind was going, because the Mercedes is awful in high-speed corners. I mean, it was trying to spit Russell and Hamilton out multiple times throughout the weekend. Anything high speed with yaw in the car.
I didn't see it as something that warranted like an investigation, because all you had to go off was like seeing the incident in real time. You don't have like a live telemetry feed that tells you like Alonso's lifting off 100 meters earlier than he normally would. And Dre, you pointed this out, that like the big reason why this was even an issue is that Alonso basically told on himself.
I applaud his honesty. I'll give him that. He in the stewards meeting, he openly confessed to the stewards. And look, I can't speak for Alonso, but if I'm going to paraphrase and combine a little bit of my own perception on this, I think he tried to intentionally back off so he could maximize his exit coming out of 6, back the wagon up a little bit and make it so that he could generate enough of an advantage coming out of the corner where Russell wouldn't be able to chase him down with DRS by the time you get to the old turn 9-10 complex now.
Yeah, which is a legitimate racing tactic. It's at worst mildly cheeky. It happens all the time.
Yeah, this is a legitimate tactic. I'm not disputing that. The problem is he didn't execute it properly, and that's more than obvious. He didn't execute it properly.
It's not a legitimate racing tactic when you're doing it so early that you're having to get back on the throttle before you get into the corner. He did it about 100 meters too early, guys.
It's like that. It's like when you've played a racing game and you know you've braked too early for a corner, so you quickly blip the throttle back on to make up the difference before you actually have to brake hard for the corner.
And you V off the corner.
Exactly. And look, the difference in entry speed into the corner was 43 kilometers an hour. That is significant. And like as alluded to earlier in this conversation, he eased off the throttle 100 meters earlier than he normally did.
He does have a history of this. He got called out for this last year in Abu Dhabi, if you don't remember.
Yeah, playing DRS chess with Hamilton. He was investigated for it, but no further action was taken. In my opinion, given what the letter of the book now says on this, I think it was erratic driving. It was not. If he tried to do this and it was close to what his normal approach was for the corner, I'd have had no problem with it. But when you're that far out compared to what you were normally doing, I think at that point, subjectively, I can understand why the stewards decided that was a punishable offence.
Now I'm going to instigate. Is this 2 times worse than Hamilton and Verstappen colliding into cops at Silverstone a couple of years ago?
No. But also, that's a completely different incident.
Is this a degree worse than Nikita Zoloff running Alex Dunn off the course with deliberate intent in Formula 3 practice and getting a 3-place grid penalty? All because Zoloff was basically just smart enough not to tell on himself.
No, what I would say to that is, one, it's a different set of stewards, so you've got to take some degree of human error into this.
Because human error champion.
Oh yeah, that phrase everyone loves to hate. But what I would also say to that is, I suspect a steward's threshold for believing something to be intentional is probably a fair bit higher than what we are as podcasters sitting down recording this, because I believe in motorsport you've got to act with a degree predominantly of good faith, because if you don't, it opens up a whole different can of worms about how we officiate these incidents. I can understand, like, you can't say in your steward's report it was an accident and then not throw the book at him for it. You know what I mean? Like, if he said, "Oh, it's an accident," oh yeah, 10-place grid penalty. That doesn't make any sense. So.
But the thing is, though, like with the Soloff crash, like it seemed like everybody other than the steward panel could see that, like, this is a guy trying to enact a bit of road rage on somebody for impeding him in qualifying.
No, don't get me wrong.
We all agree on that.
I agree with that, but the stewards the stewards are going to fundamentally act in good faith.
Yeah,
as Dre pointed out, and
they will always give the driver the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. If you said it was an accident, then you have to kind of take it at face value. What I'll say is, Alonso's been in this game long enough.
22 years.
He should know how to hide it better if he's going to play games.
What I would say in response to you, RJ, is I know you're being an instigator here, which I respect and appreciate.
Someone's got to
massive.
Someone's got to play the role of instigator. Why not the mediocre white guy in the room? No, the other one.
The other one. I would say.
Wow, didn't see that one coming. No, what I would say to you is that I do think 20 seconds as a time penalty is harsh. I think 10 seconds would have been a more appropriate punishment for this.
Yeah.
Especially given it wasn't a collision and it wasn't the newly established grounds for what leaving track and gaining an advantage was, because you can't directly blame Alonso for this, right? Like, ultimately, the thing is, if George Russell makes the corner and continues, are we so strongly convicted about this? We're not. And don't get me wrong, I admit I'm moving the goalposts here a little bit here. But
yeah, because then we talk about, like, the fact that, they punish the outcome and not the action.
And I've always been of that notion that I'm not sure the sport should be policed that way. And I suspect, given what I know about how this sport is officiated, if Russell doesn't lose control of his car at turn 6 on the final lap, Alonso probably gets away with that. And to a degree, I'm glad he didn't, but it sucks. It took a horrible accident from George for us to get to that point. But what I would say is, we as fans kicked, and to be fair, some of the drivers did too, kicked up a stink about 5-second time penalties being inconsequential because of faster drivers and faster cars often gaming the system to drive away from slower opposition, knowing that they can take a 5-second penalty and just commit the foul. The tactical foul, so to speak.
They can tank it through car performance.
So if drivers like I know Alex Albon was very vocal about this, given he was the victim of one of these in Singapore. He was victim of 2 of these because George Russell did it to him in Cota's sprint as well.
No mates rates here.
No mates rates on this one. Lando Norris kicked up a stink about it as well. When the drivers asked for more consequential penalties, I suspect this is the outcome, because if it was a 10-second penalty, Alonso still finishes the race in 6th place because his teammate Lance Stroll was 12 seconds behind him. I suspect they've hit him with a drive-through penalty to try and, quote, balance the books.
And I have no problem with that. I just hope it stays consistent.
Which it won't, because this is Formula One stewarding, and knock wappy.
Yeah.
Man.
Not wappy.
Should we talk about something that'll really make the Americans happy? Well, too bad.
Can I make one more point real quick before we move on? I'm going to address the internet here briefly, because one of our friends, Kate, made a very viable and very realistic point about the safety aspect of this, because that Russell's car was stranded in the middle of a live track. To be fair to F1 race control, I think they handled it as well as they could have done. Throwing a VSC almost immediately was absolutely the right decision. Making it a red flag instead would have made no difference.
It was the final lap of the race.
It's the final lap of the race.
And to those calls, like, you also say, like, they should have thrown a full safety car. Well, a full safety car, you can then
doesn't
race
make a
back
difference
to,
either.
Well, it actually does make a difference because you can race back to the queue to an
Exactly.
extent.
What I would say,
VSC is the right call.
The point I was going to make here is that, annoyingly, because of the big viral debate on social media about comparing IndyCar to Formula One and their safety standards, I would say a lot of people, I think, missed the biggest problem with all of this. Turn 6 needs to be addressed. This has happened multiple years now where an incident has had a car hit on either the inside or the outside wall, and it's span them back out onto the track. We saw this with Eau Rouge in recent years, where the very nature of its runoff would push a live car back onto a track if it was stranded. I think it's about time that Turn 6 be readdressed on this, because I think this is becoming a consistent problem.
It was an issue for Hauger in the F2 race as well.
Yeah. Albon last year as well. When he crashed, he was spat back out onto the track itself.
Yeah. Albon this year in practice.
Albon this year in practice, which we'll get to now.
Fantastic segue.
Because Williams is now in hot water after Alex Albon crashed into a run during free practice and wrote his car off for the weekend. And with no spare chassis available, Logan Sargeant had to sacrifice the rest of his weekend and his car to give Alex Albon a second chance to race. Was this the right decision from James Vowles?
Can I just start here by the great and hilarious commentary line from Alex Jakes on FP3 on Friday when it was Alex Albon's 28th birthday, where he said to start the broadcast, "Happy birthday to Alex Albon today, and his present, Logan Sargeant's car." I love Alex Jakes. May he never change.
Dude, he's great. This is why you got to get the F1 TV feed.
Oh, yeah. But he's the man. Love Alex Jakes. But, I mean, my problem isn't with the decision itself. If you put a gun to my head and you said you got to take one Williams driver to try and lead you to points on a weekend, you are absolutely taking Alex Albon over Logan Sargeant every time.
He has scored 86% of Williams points since 2022. You always go with the percentages.
Yeah, and if you play the percentages, you go with Alex Albon every time. The issue I have is that this was a decision that should have never had to have been made in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
There was no good way this could have ended the moment you realize you have no spare chassis.
Well, why doesn't Williams have a spare chassis?
Because this team has been stretched to its productive limit. Vowles admitted it himself when he released. Vowles is very big on the video blogging. He addresses the team and the fans on social media before, during a lot of race weekends. He's very in tune with the audience. He's one of the few team principals that's very vocal and very candid about this sort of thing. And I love James Vowles for that, by the way. I'll say that happily on the record. I'm a big fan of James. I always have been. He said it himself that he stretched Williams to its operational limit in the off-season. He deliberately wanted to fail test the system to see how far he could go. And by doing that, he had to gamble and not build a spare chassis.
Yeah, because that would compromise their development plan for the rest of the season. They would have to either delay it or put it on the shelf indefinitely.
He gambled. And unfortunately, his gamble did not pay off. Now, I had war flashbacks to Japan last year when Logan Sargeant wrote off a tub that race weekend. Mm-hmm. And they actually copped a penalty by rebuilding the spare tub too quickly that race weekend. And I would have thought that might have been where Vowles might have learned his lesson on this, because you want to give your driver every chance. You want to give him every benefit of the doubt that he will bring a car home for you every week. Unfortunately, Logan Sargeant proved on quite a few occasions last year that sometimes he couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I would have thought, have a spare tub. And they have chosen not to. Dre, and it's punished them for it.
At this level of motorsport, straight up not having a backup chassis is, in the modern era, kind of unheard of.
Yeah, I would understand it if this is like privateer sports car racing, where a lot of teams don't have spare tubs or backup cars or anything. Like if they crack the suspension, they are done for the entire race weekend. But this is the Formula One, capital W World, capital C Championship.
And I mean, we did the math during the call on this, and the last time that a team had just one car on the weekend was Russia 2014.
And we all know why that was.
We all know why that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so this comes with bigger implications as well, because that tub, as we speak, is back in Grove. They're trying to repair it.
Mm-hmm.
But if they write off one of these tubs, and they came damn close this weekend, and they simply do not have a spare, that's not a quick thing. That tub in the modern era takes about 2-3 months to make. It's a very long lead time component.
Handcrafted.
If they show up with one car, they run foul of the Concord Agreement.
Because you can't run just one car. Like, in extraordinary circumstances you can, but, you know, not every circumstance is going to be extraordinary.
It took a driver in intensive care for the last time discretion was held on that.
Yeah, and Formula One wouldn't punish them because, well, it's Williams. There's 4 or 5 sharks in the water all around them that would more than be happy to have them booted out of the championship over it.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. This shark is a little bit wounded because through 3 races this year, the Williams it's not as peaky as it was the last couple
It does not have upside. It's not quick enough in a straight line like the last 2 cars have been to mitigate how poor it is on tires, because it's just a tire muncher. They just grain them up as soon as they push. I mean, they were just straight up outgunned by Haas, who got both cars in the points thanks to Russell's last lap crash, and have officially subverted any and all preseason expectations we and everybody else had for them.
That's great. Ayo Komatsu's doing a great job. Now the hard test comes later. The Haas long-term development game.
Yes.
Fun.
We've upgraded the car, and we're out of the points.
Yeah, I was going to make this point as well. It was a disastrous weekend, not only from the fact they could only run one car, and Albon was teased by finishing 11th on the day in Australia this weekend. It was also not only the fact that Haas scored double points by having Hulkenberg and K-Mag 9 and 10. Yuki Tsunoda ended up 7th. That's 6 points for RB as well.
Yuki Tsunoda was a debatable driver of the weekend. He drove the car out of its bodywork.
So is this the immaturity at work that I hear about?
Maybe so. Maybe so.
He's about to immature his way to kick Daniel Ricciardo out of Formula One.
What I was going to say on top of that, though, is, and I'm not normally this blunt when I talk about drivers and my opinions in F1, because I always try to be as nuanced as I can about it. Logan Sargeant is finished.
Yeah, you just gave him a public vote of no confidence.
Yeah, and look, I understand the decisions as to why any smart person in that scenario would have taken Alex Albon in the same scenario. But if you hire a Formula One driver who cannot step up for you in a pinch, in a situation like this, why did you keep Logan Sargeant this offseason? You could have gotten an established veteran or somebody else to be in that seat if you were not happy with Logan. I could have understood if Williams thought he was a one and done off the back of last year. It wasn't dreadful, but he wasn't great. And you've given him a second chance. And unfortunately, look, Sargent's not been great, but he didn't ride off a car this weekend.
Yeah, this was through no fault of his
sucks.
own. Like, I hate it for him. And, like, the thing is, with Carlos Sainz probably has the equipment to put in performances to boost his free agent value. Logan Sargeant does it. If he doesn't perform in the rest of these races that he has, he's done in the sport, I fear.
Probably. Almost certainly. He'll be like, get ready to learn IndyCar, buddy, because that goes, honestly, it sucks for Sargeant. And look, we have friends of friends in our servers. We know people that talk to guys off the record. I know for a fact that James was gutted he had to make this decision. And like I said, yeah. I've heard enough James Vowles interviews and the way he talks. He has a genuine sincerity and empathy that a lot of team bosses lack in this sport. So I will always try to give James the benefit of the doubt. He's earned it from me, quite frankly. And I love that he apparently told a fan in a meet and greet, you should be upset that Logan's not racing this weekend. I applaud him and respect the fact he is candid and open with fans about the difficulty and the business nature of this sport, because a lot of people would bullshit the fans over something like this. Fowles has been alertly honest and sincere the whole way through. However, you've also accidentally, because of your own indecision about building a spare tub, you've now probably fundamentally broken a driver. One that you gave a second chance to in the first place. That's rough. That's really, really rough. And I feel I have empathy for Logan because this wasn't his fault at all.
He wasn't the one who rode off a car.
And he's had his entire weekend sacrificed to benefit Albon. And I get it. I totally get why. But I'm not sure you're ever going to get the best out of Logan Sargeant again, because you've just told him that you don't think he's good enough.
And it was ultimately for a chance, but ultimately a net nothing.
Yeah.
Because that 11th place that position from Albon flatters him because of Russell's final corner, final lap crash.
We all know that if this was peak era Jean Todt, Ross Brawn, Michael Schumacher, or Ferrari, if it came down to it, they're absolutely kicking Barrichello out of his car and putting Schumacher in if they're in a situation like that. But that's to win a race. This ultimately wasn't. And it ultimately exposes, just how thinly stretched these teams at the back of the grid are. This
is not a small F1 team. 1,000 people work for Grove. Mm-hmm. This is a massive team with a lot more resources and they have about 3 times as much staff as Haas do at the moment. They have resources, and it makes me wonder just how, shall we say, not efficient Williams have been in the last few years. If they have this much resources, this much staff, and these kind of facilities underneath them, and they've been this run down to the point where a spare tub wasn't viable. Especially
maybe they should stop running at Cell.
Especially after finishing 7th in the Constructors last year and having their best season in half a decade. And it still wasn't enough to justify building a second tub. That alarms me.
Maybe they should stop running spreadsheets.
Yeah,
maybe. I mean, this is a team who, up until last year, were running the systems put in place by BMW in 2002.
It's a problem, and they're going to have to address it. Hey, did you Europeans like getting up early for this Grand Prix? Well, I've got some good news for you, because the next one will also be another early start as F1 heads back to Japan. I almost said China for a second there. That's afterwards. But the Japanese Grand Prix next
Congratulations,
weekend.
You pissed off an entire hemisphere.
God damn it.
You want to take 2?
No, I'm good. I own my mistakes on this show. I will be like James. I will own my mistakes on this show. But the Japanese Grand Prix is next weekend in its new April slot. Another 6 a.m. start, so have fun with that, Brits. But we'll see how that plays out. And send prayers in advance for the F1 team based in Brackley, given the way Suzuka's setup goes. Send prayers. That could be ugly. Next episode, we'll be talking about MotoGP's Portuguese Grand Prix at Portimao. Hey, folks, remember Jorge Martin? Still pretty good. Until next time, I've been Dre Harrison. They've been RJ O'Connell and Cam Buckley. Until next time, thank you very much for listening. Sayonara.
And as the locals say, John, eh?
Really was different this time.